Hey y'all, welcome in. Sorry, a few minutes late there. Here at the Browning house, just trying to get everybody down for bed. That includes all three kids, 7 and under. So if 8:45 start time is a little bit behind, it's because the 1-year-old decided he's, had to get up and get out of his bed, and I guess the recording schedule didn't quite fit his sleep schedule. So. But that being said, good to be here with y'all. Guys, we're just going to do not a terribly long show tonight. We're going to preview a little bit the Natty. We're not going to do full-on analysis and predictions and stuff like that, but just kind of look at it and start kind of dipping our toes into the water there. Also going to look at some of the biggest portal additions and moves with quarterbacks. Not going to get all into the portal in terms of every position. Just it's kind of overwhelming at this point if you follow college football at all. And then we're going to do a quick little mailbag there at the end that people have sent in some questions to us, and we're going to answer them on the air. Guys, as always, you can DM us and message us on Twitter at Joey Browning CFB. You can also email us at joeybrowningcfb@gmail.com. So we'd always love to hear from y'all, get some feedback. And like I said, ask any questions you want to. These are some questions that accumulated in the last few days, and so we're going to answer those right here on the air. Guys, as always, on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. And you can also follow us anywhere where you get your podcasts, like Apple or Spotify, and then follow us on our social media accounts. Guys, we've been putting out a ton of stuff the last couple of days from the semifinal games in terms of film breakdowns on YouTube, TikTok, and Twitter. You can find all that stuff. Really had a lot of fun making that and editing those. And that's kind of the push of this show. As y'all know, those of you that have watched and listened so far, it's just getting into the film and kind of breaking down the all that stuff, why these teams are here and why they're winning. And that's really, that's the passion behind this show, and that's what we're trying to push here. So guys, just early look at the Natty. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. Indiana's a Mack truck, right? They're plowing over people. It doesn't matter who gets in their way. Alabama and Oregon, they're just the two latest victims, right? All season long, we looked at Indiana. We looked at these teams that were playing. We looked at their margin of victory. And, I think, I, myself included, a lot of people just passed it off as, hey, these are the teams they're playing. This is their schedule. They're not. This is not a terribly impressive deal in terms of who these teams are playing and how they're outscoring people. And then you just kind of look at their strength of schedule. Like we looked at it according to S&P Plus and the Sagarin ratings. They were in the low 20s in both of those in their strength of schedule. And you're like, hey, they beat Old Dominion 27-14. They beat teams like Indiana State, UCLA, Maryland, Wisconsin, Purdue. It's like, hey, who didn't beat those teams bad this year, right? Guys, ultimately, though, I think we're seeing now 15 games in, they were just beating the teams in front of them, right? And now then we're in the playoff, and even before that, you look their last 3 games, Ohio State, Alabama, Oregon. Now, out of those 3, one of those was close. One was a game, that Ohio State game, the Big Ten title game. But the others have not been, right? And that's kind of if you look at their season, 27-14 Old Dominion, then they blow out Kennesaw State, Indiana State, Illinois, who was ranked 9th at the time, Then they have a kind of a close one against Iowa. That game was 20-13, or it was tied 13 all late. Mendoza throws the late touchdown pass, and they end up winning that one. The Oregon game, the first one, pretty close most of the way through. But then you get blowouts again. Michigan State, UCLA, Maryland. Then you get another close one where they have that comeback win at Penn State. And then other blowout wins, Wisconsin, Purdue. So that's kind of their pattern, right? But what we're looking at with this bunch is just it's an unprecedented run, not only at 15-0, but just the way they're doing it, the way they're executing. We talked about it in the semifinal reaction show the other night. I talked about it a lot in my offensive breakdown of Indiana's win against Oregon. They just execute, y'all. And I know that's cliche, and from a coach, you think, man, that's just such coach speak, but they just do. Like, they run inside and outside zone. They're really good at their fade game, their vertical game. So their back shoulder stuff, just their regular go balls, the regular fades. Mendoza is really good with his feet. Not just running the ball, but in the pocket. And offensively, they don't have any holes. They're really, really solid up front. And then defensively, they're going to get after. Their corners can play lockdown. Their linebackers are very old and very seasoned. And up front, they're going to stem and move that front and slant all over the place. And they're going to make things tough for you. And they're going to play to their strengths, meaning they're going to run the ball on offense. They're going to try to get a lead on you. They're going to try to make you one-dimensional on offense, and they're going to try to make you chuck it around, right? Now, flipping over, looking at Miami. Miami has such a repeatable formula going in this playoff, right? You look at the way they beat Texas A&M. Playing defense, getting after the quarterback, slowly but surely committing to the run. Mark Frazier Jr. eventually breaking big runs in the second half. They win that game. Ohio State, same thing, getting after the quarterback, committing to the run, not putting a ton on Carson Beck. You get a defensive touchdown in there. You get Ohio State chasing. You have them having to play one-dimensional and play catch-up in a game that they have shortened the game. And then Ole Miss. Ole Miss was the one now where they kind of had to flip the script a little bit. They had to score some points. You had those 4 fourth-quarter lead changes. They had to come down and score, including that last time Ole Miss scores with 3:14 left in the game. They have to come down and score. Carson Beck really had to kind of put it on his back there. Now, they were aided by a penalty. I thought Beck used his legs really good on that drive. Of course, he had the touchdown run. But still, they have a very repeatable formula of running the football, not putting too much on their quarterback, shortening the game, and getting after the quarterback on the other team. That is the way that they play. And their defense just flies around. I mean, it's 11 white hats to the ball. It looks like they got 13 out there sometimes. They're really sound on defense. I think Corey Heatherman's done an awesome job there. I think just early kind of looking at things, looking at Indiana's ability to play mistake-free, right? They don't beat themselves. And I think this is sort of a mark. You look at Cignetti, you look at how he coaches on the sideline, his demeanor. You look at how his teams play. Like, it's clear there's an emphasis on mistake-free stuff, of executing every single play, regardless of the score, playing to a standard, and that's just what they do, right? Miami, as we know, the 2 games that they got into this year lost against Louisville and against SMU. Mistakes are what ultimately beat them, right? Mistakes are what took them down in those games. I mean, and you look, Carson Beck's season, right? Those 2 games, he threw 6 interceptions in those 2 games, including the one in overtime at SMU that pretty much sealed the win for SMU. And he had 4 at home on a Friday night against Louisville in October. So they get a lot of penalties, right? They played penalty-free. They had no accepted penalties in that quarterfinal game against Ohio State. And then they have 10 last week. And there were a lot of big key penalties in that game that hurt them against Ole Miss. kept Ole Miss drives alive. Backed when Miami had the football, it backed Miami up. They had some pre-snap penalties, some false start stuff. Miami is prone to mistakes, right? And I said it last week. The reason I picked Ole Miss, I believe Miami was the better team in the trenches. And I think that's in this kind of football game, that's always where you want to go. When things get down to the nitty-gritty and you're trying to pick these games, that's where you want to go with it, right? You don't want to get into too much guessing. That's the most sure thing you can do is look at the lines of scrimmage in a college football game and figure out who's got the advantage. But I ultimately picked Ole Miss because I thought Miami was due for a clunker in this game, and they didn't play a complete one, right? They had the one turnover, they had the penalties, but they ultimately did not beat themselves against Ole Miss. And, despite a great effort by Ole Miss, Miami was able to win that game. And that doesn't steer me away from that clunker theory, though, that this is a national championship. This is going to be a first for these coaches, a first for these players. Now, albeit on both sides, Indiana's got to do it for the first time too. But in your home stadium, that's a lot of pressure, okay? And I feel like I'm not saying that Miami's going to lose the game because they're playing the national championship at home. I just think that the odds say this being their fourth straight game in these playoffs, the odds are high that they are going to play a game at some point that's not clean. And the one team that you don't want to sit on the other sideline when you play a dirty game or you're not clean in operation is Indiana. Because they're not going to capitalize on your mistakes. They're going to cut your throat with your mistakes, right? You saw it against Oregon. That's what they did. I mean, they cashed all three of those first half turnovers in for 7 each, and it's 35-7 at half, and the game is over. Like, you see college football games all the time where, hey, team has a rough first half, they turn it over, they might throw a pick six, a scoop and score, and, it's like 20-10 at halftime or something, they're down. Not against Indiana. They ended Oregon's season in that first half, no questions asked. So I think the probability that Miami makes enough mistakes for Indiana to really put the clamps on I think that's probably more likely than not in this game that something like that's going to happen. Now, like I've said ever since the Ohio State game for Miami, they have the formula. They have it. They're going to run the ball. They're going to stop the run. They're going to get after the quarterback, and they're going to shorten the game. That's how you win this time of year. In high school football, college football, NFL football, it doesn't matter. And so they can overcome all that stuff and play a clean game, and they can win this thing. But I do think that they have got sort of an uphill battle against this Indiana team in terms of who's going to play the cleanest game. And, I think that's kind of an early tell in this game. And, looking at the line, Indiana, they're sitting there right now, favored by 8.5. Okay, this line opened. Some of the look-ahead lines, like on Thursday and Friday before those semifinal games, had the potential, the hypothetical Miami-Indiana matchup at like 5.5. Indiana opened as a 7.5 point favorite, and it's at 8.5 now. The total's 47.5. So odds makers are kind of saying, they're looking at around, like a 28-20 type of game here in favor of Indiana. I don't know if I necessarily see that as like around my score prediction for this one. Like I said, I'm not going to get into that on this show tonight, but I think the line is very telling that it's that strong in favor of Indiana at 8.5, as well as Miami's been playing. I think that's sort of a lean right there by the Vegas odds makers in this one. Now, I'll say this, an interesting angle of this game for me personally is the coaching backgrounds. A ton has been made about Curt Cignetti, his journey from a journeyman assistant to, Indiana University of Pennsylvania in D2 to Elon to JMU to Indiana. And then you have the Mike Shanahan and the Bryant Haynes connections as his coordinators, and they've followed him all along the way. That's been well documented, and those guys, they deserve a ton of respect for what they've done. They're great coaches, and they've done a great job. But to me, it's something. I think the other side has not got a lot of attention. Mario Cristobal's journey as a coach, right? He's a legacy at Miami. He's an assistant at Miami in those 2000s, early 2000s. He gets the FIU job down there in South Florida, and kind of an ugly split from them, which a lot of people, even at the time, were like, before Cristobal had kind of proven his mettle as a coach, were like, what are they doing? Fire this guy. And then he bounces around. He's an Alabama assistant at under Nick Saban, like 2013, 2014. And then he gets, he goes to Oregon to be the OC and offensive line coach under Willie Taggart. And then Taggart leaves and he gets the job at Oregon. And, I think Cristobal did a very respectable build of the roster at Oregon when he was there. And he had them obviously very competitive. On the lines of scrimmage, they were good. But Cristobal was really criticized at Oregon about, his in-game management. The offense was not exactly cutting edge and innovative enough for a lot of people, especially on the heels of, the Chip Kelly era there at Oregon. And I think a lot of people when in that winter of 21, when Cristobal, kind of rumored to get the Miami job and then ultimately got it, I think a lot of people, especially from the Oregon perspective, are like, not good riddance, because I don't think it was that type of split. Like, I think they liked Cristobal. They thought he did a good job, but not a great job. But there was a sense of, hey, we can upgrade. And I think with the hire of Dan Lanning in those first, even up to this year, right, there had been, some ideas that Oregon had upgraded. They had basically traded in Cristobal for something better. And so I think it's interesting, his coaching journey, going back to Miami, where he played, how he's built this thing is very intriguing to me. And then you look at his coordinators, right? Shannon Dawson. He's a guy that, watching film of these playoffs, and I got so much respect for Shannon Dawson and the job he's done, the way he's committed to Miami's sort of strategy and their style of offense in this playoff, of running the football and shortening the game. I mean, if you don't know, Shannon Dawson is a spread guy. I mean, he's been at Miami since 23. But before that, I mean, this guy is he's a disciple of Dana Holgorsen, right? It is spread, it is air raid as it gets, and that's really what he's been known for. I mean, he's at Houston for 4 years with Holgorsen before he goes to Miami, and then he has a stint as the coordinator at Kentucky, and before that he had another 4 seasons under Holgorsen at West Virginia. And you look at, he was at Millsaps College, he was at Stephen F. Austin, New Mexico State, earlier in his coaching careers. But most of those stops and most of those years, he's a disciple of the air raid, and as much of that air raid tree as it gets. And so the idea of this guy's on the highest level of college football, coordinating an offense to a national championship appearance that is, hey, we're running the ball, we're going to take a lot off of our quarterback's plate, and we're going to shorten the game, it's complete opposite, right, of what that air raid tree is sort of known for. And I have a ton of respect for what he's done. I think the Ole Miss game plan for Miami offensively was brilliant, with using their sniffer sets, using their condensed sets to get looks in the secondary they wanted, using motions and shifts to get stuff blocked up, committing to the run. Like I just think he's done an awesome job layering this deal in these playoffs. and he's okay. Like, he's okay winning these games 24-14, and 10-3. And he's coaching like that. And I have a ton of respect for Shannon Dawson. He's somebody you don't hear a ton about, like, with head coaching job rumors. But I think after this run, I mean, obviously this coaching window in college is past, but he's a guy in the future I think you can kind of keep your eye on there. He's done such a good job, and he's shown he's very adaptable with his scheme. So, and then the other guy, obviously on the defensive side, is Corey Heatherman, right? The guy that he's come in just this year to Miami from Minnesota. And, I think he's completely changed the way that this Miami team plays defense, their effort. If you watch them play, and sometimes it looks like they're playing with 12. Like, they just run to the football. Those inside backers, man, they take off and they fly. They're pass reading, dropping into coverage, and then they'll read and run. They'll take off across the field. They're taking pursuit angles. They're getting to the ball, and they're looking to be violent when they get there. The zone blitzes, the simulated pressures, right? He does a great job of disguising those and mixing those in. And Miami's really aggressive, right? They love playing with those 4-down pass rushers, playing one high, playing a lot of bump and run, a lot of man coverage, a lot of man free, and they'll challenge you. They're not afraid to challenge you on the perimeter with their corners and their nickel. And, you can tell Heatherman has a style to the defense that he likes to play. But, you look, he has such an interesting coaching journey, right? He was at Minnesota last year, Rutgers before that. He wasn't even the DC. He has a stint there at James Madison, right? From 2019 to 2021, kind of overlapping a little bit with that Cignetti run there. You look at that. Cignetti was he was there at JMU. He came to Indiana during. Hold on, guys, just a second. I want to say, yeah, he was at James Madison from 2019 to 23. So, he's the whole time that Heatherman was there. Cignetti was there, right? So there's that coaching connection there. That's obviously an interesting dynamic. Guys, the coaching industry is a small world, really. You think about it. It probably seems like none of these guys would ever cross paths, but there you go. Before that, he was the DC for the Maine Black Bears, right? So, you can see just kind of like Shannon Dawson, right? Corey Heatherman's been on a very kind of dynamic journey from his path as a coach to being the DC at Miami. Obviously, he's done a great job there. I think, like I said, I don't want to get too much into this game tonight. You just look at the numbers. Indiana is, I think it's going to come down to one of the big stats for me early on. Can Miami make Indiana one-dimensional? Right? Indiana averages 218 yards rushing a game. They on average run it about 41 times a game, and they only throw it about 25 times a game. And that's been their formula in these playoffs too. Can Miami flip that? Can they make them one-dimensional? Can they say, hey, Mendoza's going to have to throw it 35, 40, 45 times to beat us? I think that's a recipe for Miami, obviously. So I think the game has to play out a certain way for that to happen. So I'll give my really in-depth analysis and prediction for this game on Thursday's show. So y'all make sure to tune into that, and we'll have that lined up, okay? All right, so going now, kind of dipping into the portal a little bit. Obviously, that's been dominated even the playoff talk, right? The portal opened January 2nd, and these coaches, they've been just covered up with this stuff ever since then. Even the playoff teams, right? Like, they've been on campus trying to get ready for these games, but they've also been hosting these transfer portal guys. And I think the window for this thing, I know they've got this winter-only window now for these 2 weeks in January. Still think it needs to be tweaked, right? And this is not my favorite subject. Obviously, being a college football fan, I'm going to follow it. If you're a college football fan, you have teams and you're going to follow it, right? Because you want to know what these rosters are going to look like and who's going where. But it is overwhelming at the moment to try to keep up with all the moves. And so what I want to do tonight is just kind of summarize the quarterback market, right? And kind of where it is, the big moves that have been made. Obviously, most of the big names have, already committed. They've already signed. And guys, I think, you look at the money involved in this. These guys obviously get their money. They deserve it, right? They need to cash in because this is their opportunity. This is what the market says they're worth. So, but do you look at when this thing, 3 years ago, if you just went back in time to this time in 2023, a program was paying their quarterback $1 million, that was top notch, right? Now look, industry standards say you're going to start negotiating at like $3 million with any of these top 10 or 15 guys, right? So the money is obviously a big part of this. And these guys, some of these guys are making more than probably a handful of starters in the NFL have made this year. And, I'm not sure if that's where this thing's going to stay. But, right now, these quarterbacks, they're really making a name for themselves and they're cashing in on this stuff. And so we'll kind of get into the bigger names now. Brendan Sorsby, right? He was probably the early big winner that, as the portal window loomed there in late December, everybody's like, hey, he's going to command a lot of money. And there's going to be a bid more for him. Obviously, LSU was involved there. He took a visit to Baton Rouge. But ultimately, Texas Tech and that Permian Basin oil money, they went out, and Sorsby's going to be a Red Raider next year. I think this is huge for Joey McGuire, obviously. I think you could make the argument that quarterback was a position this year where it lagged behind a little bit in terms of the rest of the talent of the roster. And I think you saw that in that Oregon game in the Orange Bowl, right? They had no answers once Oregon stopped the run, and I think they were in over their head a little bit. Sorsby's a guy who's an athlete. He can run. I think if you watch some Big 12 games this year for Cincinnati, he's very impressive with his upside. And I think he's somebody that Mac Leftwich, the OC at Texas Tech, he can definitely build their scheme around Sorsby. And, I'm really looking forward to seeing with a quarterback like Sorsby, Texas Tech take the next step next year, not just winning the Big 12, but are they going to make a dent in the playoffs next year with somebody like him? Obviously, kind of going on down Sam Leavitt, right? So Sam Leavitt's really just in the last day or so committed to LSU. Lane Kiffin, always the center of drama, even in the portal. You got to think transfer portal quarterbacks, Lane Kiffin. Where's the drama, right? But so Leavitt took some visits. He visited LSU. He visited Knoxville, and kind of reports out there that while he's in Knoxville, he decides he's going to stay for an extra day. Lane Kiffin gets on a plane and goes to Knoxville, and it basically gets the commitment of Sam Leavitt in the Knoxville airport. So kudos to Lane getting his guy. Leavitt was hurt this year. He had the foot surgery. He's very limited, obviously, with what he did this year. But, you look at what he's done, his body of work at Arizona State, a guy I think with tremendous upside, big arm, obviously can move well in the pocket, can hurt you with his legs as well. I think this is prototypical for what Lane needs to start his deal in Baton Rouge, right? A proven quarterback that can step in that huddle and can command the rest of that talent they're going to have there at LSU. And he's a guy that they can go win with immediately. There's not going to be any limitations on Sam Leavitt. And, you've seen what he's done. The whole run last year, Arizona State winning the Big 12, making the playoff. And then even this year, you saw it in spots when he wasn't hurt. winning that game against Texas Tech. Like, he's a dude, right? I mean, he's the only guy to throw for 300 yards this year against Texas Tech. So that ought to tell you something. One of the earlier guys, and kind of quiet under the radar, but I think statistically and like possibly the biggest sort of underrated guy is Drew Mestemaker, right? The North Texas quarterback who's going to follow his coach, Eric Morris, from North Texas to Oklahoma State. A big win, obviously, for Morris. And guys, this is one of those deals that, hey, everybody's saying Mestemaker, even halfway through the season, he's going to be a big portal guy. And then Morris gets, in November, gets the Oklahoma State job. I mean, and this was rumored to happen for, a month or so, and then the portal finally opens, and there you go, he goes in. I think it's sort of a plug-and-play situation. Following his coach, he's going to have some of his other guys from North Texas there around him that have also followed Morris to Stillwater, and it's going to be interesting to see, how big of a leap can Morris take at Oklahoma State in year one just because his quarterback follows him. I think it's going to be something that is kind of under the radar because Oklahoma State has been so down and they're so bad this year. And once Mike Gundy was fired, I don't know if Oklahoma State even had a game televised, it seemed like, on most Saturdays after that happened. They're just kind of off the radar. And so that's going to be one that I think it'll be fun to watch. Talking about Indiana, Cignetti went and got a big name in the portal in Josh Hoover, right? The TCU quarterback, super athletic guy from Rockwall, Texas, who, if you watch that Labor Day night game, TCU in North Carolina, the guy looked like he might be the Heisman Trophy winner this year. I mean, he's a very good player, and he jumped in the portal, left Sonny Dykes' team, and he's going to Bloomington, Indiana. This is one of those portal wins that Cignetti has kind of made his name on in Indiana, where they're kind of winning on these guys on their reputation. Now, obviously, they've got the checkbook out. They're writing, the big money checks to these guys, but they've got proof of concept now. Not only did they go 11-2 last year, they're 15-0 this year. I mean, he's got a lot to offer these guys in the portal when they come visit there, and the proof of concept is there from his 2 years. He doesn't have to say much to convince these guys, and I think Josh Hoover's a huge win for them. I mean, if you looked at, I think he didn't have, there wasn't a ton around him this year at TCU, and the guys still, if you turn them on and watch their games, man, I mean, he made a ton of plays, and I think he has tremendous upside. Now, part of me, this is the downside of the portal, right? You got a guy from Rockwall, Texas, okay? You're within an hour of Fort Worth, of TCU's campus, who, went to college to play in a Big 12 program at a powerhouse in Texas, and now he's going in the portal to Bloomington, Indiana. And to me, that's just an example of kind of how the portal is. There are no roots regionally in college football with these guys anymore. There's no footprint, right? Like a guy like Drew Mestemaker, who's from Austin, Texas, who I just mentioned going to Oklahoma State, or Josh Hoover from Rockwall, Texas. These guys are these quarterbacks traditionally from those types of places, they've stayed in that Texas or Big 12 footprint, right? But he's going to the Big 10 to play at Indiana. It seemingly has no connection there. To me, that is the part of this portal deal that makes it even more like pro football, in my estimation, that I'm not a big fan of. But good for Hoover, good for Indiana. The rich get richer, and I think that'll be a guy that can step right in for Mendoza. And he's obviously not the prospect that Mendoza is, not yet anyway. But I think they're going to have big gains with him and not have a whole lot of fall off, right? DJ Lagway, okay, another Texas guy out of Willis, Texas. Lagway was, he's that biggest probably, I say boomer bust prospect at quarterback his first couple of years in college at Florida. obviously there was so much made of the way they ended the 24 season and saving Billy Napier's job and rolling into 25 and saying, hey, this guy, he can get Florida to the playoff. And then, man, for a multitude of factors, it just didn't happen, right? And things fell apart there, and he left. And, looking at the places he went to visit, right, or who were in the running for him, Virginia, Stanford, Baylor, like, you wouldn't thought 5 months ago that, hey, if Blackway goes in the portal, those are going to be the schools that are courting him, right? To me, I think, though, it is good for Lagway. He's going there to Baylor. Dave Aranda is able to keep his job. I think he's coaching for his job next year, and there's no doubt about that. But, under Jake Spavital at OC this year, they were the fourth best passing offense in the country. Go turn it loose, man. Show everybody what you can do. Show everybody those traits, those characteristics that made you that 5-star guy, and gave you, all that momentum in your freshman year at Florida, and go to the Big 12, man, and just show what kind of player you are. And the pressure's off. Like, I think this is a good move for GJ Lagway. Going back to Texas, going to the Big 12, and playing in a place like Baylor under a guy like Spavital, who's gonna cater to his quarterback. He's gonna do what his quarterback does well on offense, and I think that's gonna be an interesting thing to watch. Not only Baylor's trajectory next year with Dave Aranda coaching for his job, but DJ Lagway is that that resurrection story is there to be had. He's just got to do it, right? And I think Dave Aranda has hitched his wagon to DJ Lagway. I think their fate's kind of similar, one and the same. So that'll be an interesting one to watch. Dylan Raiola, right? Raiola, very famously, right, after he had flipped from Ohio State to Georgia, flipped from Georgia to Nebraska on his high school signing day, and he's a Nebraska legacy. His dad, Dominic Raiola, played there. His uncle was an offensive line coach there. And, rumors started popping out about this was going to happen, late in the year. Raiola got hurt. He didn't finish the year playing. And he goes in the portal. And, I think he caught a lot of flack. Raiola did. Social media. People ate him up talking about, hey, the guy played for 4 different high schools. He's had 3 different college commitments and flipped on all of them. What do you expect, right? But I think, Raiola went somewhere, and I think he tried to do right by his family. He tried to do right by his legacy and his name, and didn't work, right? For whatever reason, whatever drama happened behind closed doors, the relationship obviously severed there between him and the staff, and he's moving on. His brother, who is just finished his high school career at Buford in Georgia, who was committed there, he also decommitted. And so Raiola lands at Oregon, which is such an interesting dynamic to me that he could go just about anywhere. I mean, the guy's, the number 19 total prospect in the transfer portal. He could kind of, name his own ride wherever he wanted to go for the most part. He goes to Oregon, where Dante Moore is still there. And who knows whether he's going to declare for the draft or not. He could come back. And so Raiola and his team obviously know that. And so with that factored in, it's kind of surprising that he's committed there. But I think if you look at it, look at what Dante Moore did when he went to Oregon, right? Dante Moore originally went to UCLA. He started some his true freshman year. He got hurt. Chip Kelly ended up leaving at the end of the year, and Dante Moore goes to Oregon. He sets for a year behind Dylan Gabriel, and then he comes in and plays this year. To me, this move says that Raiola is open to something like that, right? That this has been a pattern at Oregon, that they've taken quarterbacks that have set for a year and come in and played the next year, and they've been better for that. Now, it's interesting that Raiola, he's already played 2 years at Nebraska as the starter, that he would go somewhere and set for a year. But, obviously something like that is played into this decision because, that's where he's going. And so, I think it's going to be obviously the first domino that has to fall here is Dante Moore's NFL decision. Is he coming back? And then you're going if that's the case, then what's that dynamic like with Dante Moore and Rayola in the same quarterback room, both having plenty of starts under the belt in college, and both being sort of top line guys in college. So that's one of the offseason storylines I think will be tremendous if Dante Moore comes back for another year at Oregon. Is that quarterback room up there in Eugene? So, couple more. Byron Brown, right? Goes from South Florida and lands right there with his old coach, Alex Golesh, in Auburn, Alabama. This is obviously a big recruiting win for Auburn. Getting a proven guy like Brown who is, he's proven his mettle, right? The guy went to the Swamp last year. He beat Florida. And, for the most part this year and last year too, as the starter down there in Tampa, made a name for himself. He knows Golesh's offense. Obviously, Golesh going to Auburn and having the resources he has as the head coach at Auburn and having zeroed in on Brown to be his guy and having coached him, this is a win for him, right? He knows what he's getting there, and he knows that this is a big deal for him. And so it'll be interesting to see Brown play in the SEC and take Golesh's offense into that conference. But definitely leg up for Golesh right there, getting his guy to come with him. I think that'll be a fun one to watch, obviously. So guys, that's not everybody in the portal, like I said, and the portal kind of makes me want to pull my hair out sometimes trying to keep up with it. Who's going where? Who's flipped where? And but I think the quarterback dynamic kind of sums a lot of it up. Those are obviously the position that gets paid the most attention to, and it's the one that's going to get talked about the most. And, at some point after the national championship game, I'll do kind of a recap of the other big position moves, and we'll even probably do some segments of the offseason, like who's going to have the biggest impact on their new team going forward. So that'll be something that we'll cover more in depth when we get to that point. So, all right. So, lastly, I've had some interaction with some folks sending stuff in to what we're going to call our mailbag and just asking questions, bringing up topics, making things, like I said, from the very beginning of this show, engaging with the audience and talking about the things that you guys want to talk about. So I'm going to answer a couple of them here before we sign off tonight. So the very first one comes from Jim in Rome, Georgia. Jim asks, do recruiting rankings matter anymore? With Indiana and Ole Miss, other teams in the playoff, having the runs they've had, and the more traditional high school recruiting teams not being as successful, are we to the point where recruiting rankings don't really matter? It's interesting. I think recruiting rankings have, through the years, guys, are a projection. Right? I don't care. Way back when in the glory days of, Scout and 24/7 and Rivals and all that stuff, checking message boards and seeing who committed where, like that stuff, it's always been a projection, right? There's always been recruiting busts. There have always been misses. There's always been diamonds in the rough and people that fly under the radar in recruiting. All I think that the transfer portal and this NIL era have done, it's just magnified those things, and it's made evaluating more significant, I think. That if you miss on, the certain players in the core of your position groups in high school recruiting, then that's going to be a glaring thing that you have to fix in the portal, right? I think the more guys you hit on in high school coming out, based on their rankings and based on how their upside, then obviously the more successful your program's going to be long term, right? I think the one thing that kind of gets lost in, especially talking about a team like Indiana, they're the center of this whole conversation. And you watch the games and you hear the broadcast and they talk about, hey, they have no 5 stars and Oregon has all these 5 stars and Alabama's got all these 5 stars and look at what they're doing with this roster of under recruited guys. The reality is, yes, those guys might have been under recruited, but the evaluation of having those 23 and 24 and 25-year-old in some cases players at a place like Indiana is those players have not been evaluated in terms of their upside by like a recruiting service since they were in high school. So who's to say that guy when he was 18-year-old, if he was a 2-star coming out who signs with James Madison and then follows Cignetti to Indiana, 5 or 6 years later, he's still playing in college. He's 24 years old. Who's to say what his recruiting ranking would be now, right? You can't project that. There's no service that does that. And so I think you have to look at that. The people who are out there, throwing mud at the recruiting industry over this, saying that, hey, look, does it really even matter? Just like I am always pretty much with these types of topics, I think you gotta have to kind of be taken in moderation, right? Like, yes, there probably shines a light that the recruiting rankings have more holes in it than we thought before. But also, the recruiting rankings sort of shed light on what programs are going to be the most consistent, right? You look at the Georgias and the Ohio States and the Alabamas and the teams that recruit year in and year out, they're going to be your most stable teams. They're your most stable programs. They might not win the national championship every year, but they're going to be the most stable. I think that baseline foundation is provided by recruits who are highly ranked by recruiting rankings. So, to me, if anything, the recruiting rankings matter more now than they ever have because that's where you're going to get your sustainability. You're not going to build teams through the portal and last, right? Even Indiana, even Ole Miss, the teams that had so much success this year and the past couple years with lots of transfers, they want to build the long-term through high school recruiting. Like, that's every major program's goal. You don't want to be living in the portal. Look at Florida State, right? Florida State goes 13-0, wins the ACC with a portal team, and they try to redo it every year, and look what's happened since. Look at their program since that 23 season. I think it's just very tough to do. And there are other examples. I'm not just picking on Florida State, but I think it's very difficult to say, hey, we're going to be 70% of our roster for years and years and years portal built, right? I think you've got to have some high school recruiting as your base there and as your foundation. So to me, the recruiting rankings probably matter more than they ever have in that regard. So, all right. Next question. We have Mark from Gainesville, Florida. Mark says, has this run of Miami coinciding with Oregon's disappointing end in the playoff flipped the Cristobal Lanning dynamic? So, as we mentioned earlier, the idea of Mario Cristobal's path from being the head coach at Oregon, taking the Miami job at the end of 21, and Dan Lanning being hired to Oregon to replace him, the perception has always been, since that happened, that Oregon upgraded. That Cristobal left. He did a good job at Oregon. He built a good roster. He built a good program. But the upside was not there. The ceiling was only so high with Cristobal. And Lanning was coming in. He was younger. He brought a little bit different attitude in terms of his energy, in terms of his, obviously his defensive background and his ability to connect with players. Like, there was this idea that Dan Lanning, and also Dan Lanning went out and won games, right? Like, regardless of that first game of his career against Georgia in that season opener, the guys won every year at Oregon. And he's got them in the playoff the last 2 years, and they got to the semis this year. So it's not that Lanning's whole reputation at Oregon's been propped up by some perception, right? He's won games. He's won on the field. That's what matters. But there was this idea that Cristobal did not manage in-game stuff very well, and his teams tended to fold at the worst times, at the least ideal moments, and that had kind of been that followed him not just at Oregon, it had followed him to Miami. Right? You look at the Georgia Tech game a couple years ago. Was on that Friday night was the perfect example of this. They could have took a knee into the game. They fumble. Tech gets the ball. Tech goes and scores and wins. And then you look at last year where it looked like they had a playoff team. They had a Heisman Trophy winner leading them in Cam Ward. They had the best offense in the country, but somehow they lose 3 games, including to Syracuse at the end of the year to seal things and keep them out of the playoff. And then this year, right, the Louisville and SMU games, they built on that narrative. And Dan Lannon, up until this point, had only built on his side of the narrative, right? Going 13-0 last year, winning the Big Ten, being the number 1 overall seed. And then this year, going 11-1, getting into the playoff, winning 2 games. Like, he had only increased his viability on this side. But now you look at Cristobal's unlikely run with this Miami team through the playoffs, beating Texas A&M in College Station, beating Ohio State, who is the going-away favorite in this playoff, and then beating Ole Miss in that barn burner of a game in the Fiesta Bowl, and getting to this point, building a team that he kind of shaped with his own vision, his stock has obviously never been higher. And on the flip side of that, you look at Lanning. I mentioned last year going 13-0, being number 1, winning the Big Ten. They got destroyed in their quarterfinal game in the Rose Bowl against Ohio State in a rematch. It was 34-8 at halftime. The game was over in the first quarter. And then this year, you get back and get to the semifinal. You get another rematch against another Big Ten team in Indiana, and you completely look unprepared. You turn the ball over 3 times in the first half and give them Indiana 3 touchdowns, and it's a disaster. And you have people asking, is Dan Lannon the right guy for the job? Is Oregon going to win a national championship under Dan Lannon's leadership? And you also obviously have the Indiana dynamic of Oregon's been a program that has been all in on winning a national championship in football for decades now. It really started around that 06-07 era with Chip Kelly coming in, and then they've only built to that since, right? They built up from that. They've played a couple of national championship appearances. They've gotten close, but they've never kicked the door in. And then all of a sudden you just have Indiana come and jump them in front of the line, and it looks like they're going to win a national championship. They're an 8.5-point favorite to win the national championship game on Monday. And all that can do is add fuel to the fire, right? So my perspective on this, in my opinion, obviously in the public eye and the narrative the narratives, I should say, that run college football and its fandom would say yes, it has somewhat flipped. Now, I think Mario Cristobal, I think the outcome of Monday night's game is going to tell a lot about this whole deal. If they win, sure, is cemented for good, right? That Miami did they've won in this. Oregon did not upgrade. That Dan Lannon, yes, he might win a national championship, but he didn't win one before Miami did with Cristobal, and that things, that Miami made the right choice, and Oregon's the one that ultimately lost that, right? However, if they do not win, right, and say next year they're losing a ton of this team, right, a ton of this roster will not be back from Miami. Let's say next year you go 8-4, and you don't make the playoff, and this is as close as you get. And who knows? Dan Lannon's 39 years old. He's not getting fired anytime soon. Oregon is built in this NIL and in this portal era to win. And they're going to kick the door in at some point. It's just a matter of time, in my opinion. So in that regard, I think the pressure, if like he cared anything about it, Mario Cristobal, this whole narrative, I would say the pressure's on him to win this game Monday night if that narrative is to flip, because I think the odds are longer in the future for Miami to get back here. Now, he's done it once. Who's to say he can't do it again and repeat this formula at Miami? But I think Mario Cristobal, he's done more than enough to prove his mettle as a head coach in college football. And this run they're on is just part of that process playing itself out. And I think Lanning, guys, he's young. Like I said, in this game, he's 39 years old. This is his fourth year as a head coach. He's gonna figure it out. He's getting them there, right? And like I said about Georgia after the Sugar Bowl loss to Ole Miss, getting to these games, these coin flip games, that's the skill in this sport in this day and age. I think these games are coin flips when you get there, and a lot of it's the luck of the draw and obviously execution in the moment. But the getting in the dance is the biggest part of the battle as a coach, in my opinion. And so Landon's obviously proven he can do that. I think it's repeatable, his formula for doing that, and I think Oregon will no doubt be back. So, I think that one's remains to be seen, to be determined on that Cristobal Landon deal. All right, our last question comes from Dave in Birmingham, Alabama. Would you rather live in Miami, Florida, or in the state of Indiana? It's funny. I've actually happened to have been to both of these places. Visited Miami. I've been through there. I've driven through there a couple of times. And I have actually driven through Indiana before too. I'm going to say for my own personal taste, stuff like this comes down, for me, it's going to come down to food is going to be a big part of this. I think it's going to come down to obviously extracurricular activities you can do. And I think it's going to come down to just straight vibes, right? What do you prefer? I think this is a pretty close one, honestly. So Miami, I think food-wise, obviously Miami is going to be, it's one of the best food cities probably in the United States. You've got a Cuban history there, and obviously a large Cuban community. Cuban food is as good as it gets in a place like the southern United States. A Cuban sandwich, how do you beat that? You have obviously Haitian influence, a large Caribbean influence in general there. I think Miami as a food city is probably top 5 in the United States. And, there you go. So I think you give Miami the edge in that. Extracurricular stuff. Now, obviously, Miami, you've got great weather 12 months out of the year. I haven't checked the forecast for down there for next week for the national championship game, but probably going to be 80 degrees, sun shining. You're going to get a passing rain shower every day. That's just what happens down there. But obviously you can get outside and do a bunch. You got the beaches, you got fishing. The offshore fishing in that part of Florida, and also the inlet fishing in places like Biscayne Bay. It's kind of endless in what you can do. But Indiana, an underrated part of Indiana, I think is hunting. Not just deer hunting. If you're into hunting, bird hunting, pheasant hunting, stuff like that in Indiana, obviously very good. I've never hunted there myself. I know people that have, and to me, myself personally, I'd rather be in the tree stand probably than on the beach most of the time. But to each their own. I think the weather probably is going to end up being the kicker here for a lot of people. That 80 to degrees year round, or not year round. It's hot. It's hotter than that in the summertime in Miami. But you look at Indiana, that Midwestern weather, that's kind of hard to miss in this comparison, right? You look at, the only time I was there was in January, and it was the wind chill was 0 in Indianapolis when I went. So you got to bundle up and Some people prefer that, but I think the weather is a big part of this. As far as some living there, I don't think I want to live in Miami. I wouldn't mind visiting there. I could probably live in like a small rural place in Indiana if I had to. So I guess my answer there is giving the edge to Indiana. So we are answering the important questions on our podcast tonight. So, well, guys, with that being said, I want to thank y'all again for being here. It's going to be fun kind of getting closer and closer to this national championship game, starting to break this thing down, seeing who's going to win. Like I said, guys, please check out other videos in our shorts on our YouTube page, as well as Twitter and TikTok. Put a bunch of content out as far as those the scheme and the film breakdowns, both Indiana and Miami's offenses. That was a lot of fun to do. Looking forward to watching some more of them. And then, like I said, on Thursday night, probably do another preview show, an in-depth analysis of the matchup and a prediction of the game. And then obviously we'll have all weekend to get ready for the game, and we'll do a live show and a reaction as soon as the national championship game is over on Monday. Guys, please don't forget to subscribe. Click that subscribe button. Follow us on Twitter, TikTok, and anywhere you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify. And guys, we appreciate y'all being here, and we'll see you next time.